think it's so important to recognize that at any stage you have multiple possibilities. Again, you're not going to have a catastrophic consequence if you do this versus that.
Hello, and welcome to Listening for Purpose, Our Campus, Our Stories. I'm your host, Cam Haggett, and this season we are talking to people at Valpo about what inspires them and how they discern purpose in their lives. Today my guest is Dr. Stacy Hoult, chair of the World Languages and Cultures Department. How's your day going?
It's going well, thanks. I think we're all ready for a break.
Oh, yes.
It's a beautiful fall weather today, so
beautiful fall weather. All right, to get started, I'm just going to ask you a nice, easy question. On a perfect day, what is your ideal breakfast?
Oh, my ideal breakfast. I would say some good, health nut toast, well toasted with almond butter.
Oh, that sounds great. What level are you using on the toaster to get it well toasted?
It's pretty high. I'm about an 8 on the toaster.
Whoa, okay. Yeah. You like burnt toast? Okay,
I
good
like
to
burnt
know.
toast.
I respect that.
Thanks.
All right. So before we get into the meat of our conversation today, I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Specifically, where are you at? How did you get here? And where are you going? You can take that in terms of career, relationships, physical, mental, spiritual, anything you feel like sharing.
Where I'm at, today specifically. I should say that I'm at Valparaiso University. I'm physically in the Arts and Sciences building, Department of World Languages and Cultures. I've been with this department for almost 25 years now. So I came here in 2001. Currently serving as chair of the department, as well as a Spanish professor. So I get to teach students like Cam every day, but I also get to be an administrator. And specifically today, I'm tired because, again, it's midterms. But I feel like mentally and spiritually pretty well. I appreciate, like I said, beautiful days like this. We had a lovely service this morning, going out, to see the labyrinth. I thought that was really nice. So overall, I'm tired but grateful right now. And how did I get here?
Yes.
As in, how did I get to Valpo?
However you want to take it.
However I want to take it. My path to Valpo. Well, we're going to get into that a little later when I talk about this mentor figure. Fell in love with the Spanish language and literature, Latin American literature in high school. Decided to major in foreign languages. That's what it was called at the time, and just kept going with it. So I got a master's and a PhD in Romance languages. Was living in Chicago, saw an ad in the Chicago Tribune for Valparaiso University, which I knew about only because of basketball, like a lot of people, I think, but I knew it was pretty near. And I wanted to stay in the area, and I applied, and it's been a wonderful career here. I'm very grateful to be still here.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And where do you think you're going?
Where am I going? Well, I'm kind of on the downward slope towards retirement at this point, so I'm sort of a late career person, and I'm actually honestly trying to figure that out. I'm enjoying just kind of pursuing some different hobbies and kind of thinking about, what am I called to do next and what will I enjoy doing next. Haven't quite figured it out yet, but I have some ideas that I'm kicking around.
Much like a college student.
So much like a college student, I do not know where I'm going, and that's okay.
Yes.
Right? We have to embrace that, I think, and just embrace the possibilities.
Yes. So what kind of hobbies do you enjoy?
So this is the nerdiest thing that you're ever going to hear. Well, you were in Quiz Bowl, so maybe not.
I was in Quiz Bowl.
Sorry that I just exposed you in such a way. We've talked about this. Now, I love crossword puzzles, word puzzles in general, but I am really, really super nerdy about crossword puzzles. And I've just recently entered the world of competitive solving.
Competitive crossword puzzles?
Which I did not know existed until recently. And I just started thinking, I love doing this. I do it kind of as a solitary pursuit every day, at least one. Can this be done competitively? And sure enough, there are tournaments, there are leagues.
Is it speed-based?
It's speed-based, unfortunately, because I'm not fast. I'm pretty good at them, but I'm not, I haven't developed the skill set of being really quick at it. So I went to my first in-person tournament actually just this past Saturday. Did not distinguish myself. I was some kind of in the middle of the pack, but it wasn't great. It was a humbling moment.
Yes.
And I'm in this online league currently, and again, not distinguishing myself, but having a blast. It's a community.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It has been.
All right, so in this season of the show, we are diving into the things that inspire us. Each week, our guests are bringing a person to discuss that has shaped the way they think about purpose and vocation. That can be someone you know or someone you've never even met. So, Professor Hoult, what have you brought for us to talk about today?
First of all, I struggled with this, as I think I shared with you. It took me a long time to respond to your email because I think, mentors and inspirational people appear at different stages when you need them, right? The one I needed when I was a little younger than you was my high school Spanish teacher. So that's Mrs. Kelsheimer, that's whom I'm bringing today.
Amazing. Can you give us an overview of this person and their role in your life?
Yeah, so I took Spanish all 4 years of high school. Mrs. Kelsheimer was, like me, a small town, central Illinois person who somehow fell into Spanish. And I actually regret not asking her more about that, like how she got into it. But she was the only language teacher at my tiny little high school. My high school was a little over 100 people. It was a very small school, farming community. I think she was married to a farmer. I grew up on a farm, right? So there are all these connections culturally, and yet we're both in love with this language that is spoken by no one in the area, right? So literally no connections that we can draw on from our local community. We just both really loved the Spanish language, which I understand you do as well because you're majoring in it, and the literature, and the culture. And she really inspired me to keep going with my study of language. She was my role model in many ways for teaching. She did what she could to bring culture and the real world into the classroom. It was hard given where we were. But in so many ways, she was just a very strong role model for me in high school.
That's amazing. So you got into this a little bit, but what are some of your strongest or most important memories of this person?
One of the things that I think about when I think about my high school teachers, Mrs. Kelsheimer is one, but others as well. And this isn't something that I think would happen now. They were all sort of quietly, matter-of-factly, also Christian role models for me in a way that I don't think would be brought into the classroom in a public school. It wasn't heavy-handed. It wasn't anything like that. Just casually, they would say little things that would make it clear that they identified as Christian. They would empower themselves to provide unsolicited moral instruction sometimes. And what I mean by that, so it's the 80s, okay? Mrs. Kelsheimer would hear us quoting songs by whomever, Prince or whatever. Prince is a great musical artist, R.I.P. Prince, but his lyrics sometimes, right, were not pleasing to the ears of my high school teachers. And she would call it out, or if we were talking about some show we watched or whatever, or if we threatened each other with certain wrestling holds because professional wrestling was starting to be a thing, then, she would just give us her opinion on it. In a quiet way that again wasn't heavy-handed, but you knew it was a small town, right? Most people were churched and practicing, not just kind of white evangelicals, but actual practicing Christians. It was a thing that you could kind of assume. That wasn't true of any other community that I've ever been in since then. Valpo is the closest, but we're not all Christian here, and we're not all the same kind of Christian, and etc. But that's one thing that I remember is those little moments when she would hear us talking about something that she thought was inappropriate or a bad influence. The other thing I remember from her, this is still funny to me, and it will resonate with you because you've taken Spanish 102. She would get to the section on the subjunctive and just shut it down. I'm not even going to try. I'm not going to try to explain this to you. We're going to do plays now. And so she just kind of knew her audience, I think. Or she just didn't have the tools, I don't know, to try to teach this concept that we don't really, it's hard to explain to English speakers.
Right.
So she knew, I guess, when to play to her strengths and then when to go off and like do something else when the textbook was leading us down a path that she didn't want to go down. And she would do creative things. We would put on plays, little skits and things like that. And just really encourage those of us who wanted to go farther with the language. It was an elective for us at that time. It wasn't a requirement. So it was really people who were interested in it. And she really maintained that interest.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I find that very interesting. So do you feel like because obviously you're a Spanish educator now,
Mm-hmm.
do you find that you take some of her lessons about, playing to your strengths and your class's strengths and stuff of that nature?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I do sometimes scold my students when they're inappropriate. You have to, right? But yeah, I mean, I think, there are times when you just kind of have to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in my class right now. You may have noticed we don't always get to all that stuff at the end of the chapter. And that's because I've looked at it and I've thought, you know what, we really need to do a little more with these commands, or we really need to do a little more with descriptions. So we're not going to do that whole video thing at the end. I mean, you have to kind of choose based on, okay, what do my students need? Students in 203 need a lot of review and recycling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a new book for me, as I think I've mentioned. I love how the guys in the front row make fun of me too when I like accidentally click out of something, and they're all like, "Oh no!" And it's a chorus of "Oh no," because I'm a little challenged with the interactive online textbook and Canvas and all the toggling. So anyway, I find that hysterical. But yeah, learning to adjust, I think, and just kind of think about what do the students need versus what I'm trying to get through.
Yeah, that's a very valuable skill, I would say.
So,
all right. So how did your high school Spanish teacher impact the way that you think about purpose in your own life?
I would say she sort of gave me my purpose.
Wow.
Because Spanish was it for me after I took her classes, But at the same time, and maybe this will resonate with other language, I don't think with you necessarily, with other language students, I feel like I didn't know, it took me a really long time to know what I wanted to do with. I knew I wanted to do something with this language that I loved. And I knew that I loved to read in the language. And I went through these stages where I actually thought I was going to be a literary translator.
Ooh.
That was an aspiration for a while. Literally 0% of people can make a living doing that, right? I would have had to teach or do something else. But I loved literature so much. I loved poetry so much. And I felt really pulled to that. So I came into graduate school not knowing really what I was going to do. And what happened was I was forced into teaching. And I know that I looked back on her lessons because I didn't have, very many models at that point. No idea what I was doing. Was thrown into the classroom first day. I hadn't even had like the pedagogy class yet. I had like 3 days of orientation. Boom, go teach Spanish at the college level. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I remember the first day it was pure adrenaline. The second day was terrible. I was like, I can't do this. I've got like 25 college students in this room looking at me. I don't know what I'm doing. And then the third day, there was a little bit of a breakthrough. I just put them in pairs to talk to each other about something or other. Somehow it worked. And I felt absolutely jubilant after that. And that's when I thought, I can do this, as a career. It was so incredibly satisfying. I actually am starting to tear up thinking about it. Just like a successful class activity, one activity. I thought these people are learning. They came in here and they didn't know any Spanish, and they're actually greeting each other and having a little exchange. So, my high school teacher definitely set me on that path, but there was continuing discernment over the years of what exactly am I going to do with this.
Yes, I'm sure. I'd love to hear more about that. What were some challenges in your process of finding your calling?
I was really resistant to the idea of teaching as a career. And I think a lot of people are. I see a lot of majors who come in or minors, people who are doing language, and they really want to keep going with the language, and they have no interest in teaching whatsoever. They're not even putting it on the table. And I think there's this mythology that you have to be some kind of super patient person. Often people will say, I don't have the patience to teach. I'm not a very patient person, honestly. I'm not. I don't think that's a virtue that we all have. I think, a lot of people who teach at the college level are people who fell in love with the discipline first. then figured out they actually liked sharing that with younger people, but we weren't necessarily always heading that way. And I think it's a thing that happens sometimes with language people, probably with some other disciplines as well, where you fall in love with this body of knowledge, right? Or with this system that is the Spanish language, and you want to do something with it, and you don't quite know what you're called to do with it. And that's okay. If you're there, that's okay. You'll have different experiences in life, and you'll figure it out, or you'll discern your way out of things. I taught public school in Chicago for 1 year only, middle school. Found out that I was not good at that, right? So you try things. I tried translation for a while. I translated, for an encyclopedia, was not great at that. So you try things and you figure it out. But I wish that people had talked to me like we talked to Valpo students about vocation, because that wasn't really a thing when I was an undergraduate, at least where I was. Kind of integrating this thing that I love to do and that I'm reasonably good at with what am I called to do in the world. We didn't really have those conversations, or if we did, I was oblivious or don't remember them. But I think it's something we do better here than typically other institutions do, and I could have used a little bit of that. I think there was a disconnect, and this is kind of I'm circling around this, but the point I really want to make is that you can study languages for years, but not really have that much of a connection to the communities that speak those languages. It's possible to learn a language as a system and not really think that much about the lived experiences that are associated with that language. And I feel like that was my situation for a long time. Again, I grew up for undergrad at places where I didn't have contact with Spanish speakers. Didn't really travel. I mean, I had a small town upbringing, didn't spend time in Spanish speaking countries. And I feel like it was actually here, early in my career here, when I was asked to advise live. And that's when I really started learning from my students about what my calling was. It was the live students really that taught me, and my language students as well, but my live students who were sharing their everyday lives with me, their culture with me. That's when I feel like I made some connections that weirdly enough I hadn't made in all of my 10 years of graduate school, reading lots of books, lots of poetry, not thinking a lot about, okay, but then how do I use this to serve, to do good in the world? How do I bring this to some community of learners in a way that's life-giving, that's kingdom building? Like, how do I put it all together? I didn't know. And I think it took being here and making a connection with those students for me to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I feel like that's very helpful for our audience to hear that, you didn't graduate from undergrad and immediately figure out what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life, and it brought you perfect fulfillment and all that. You really had, it was a process for you to figure it out.
Definitely a process. And I think, people at your stage, and particularly I think my senior year of college, I was in an active panic. And I see this in my students a lot because I didn't know. I didn't have the plan. I didn't have the straight line, right? And I wish someone had told me, you know what, that's okay. It's so okay not to know at this stage. You're not going to make a decision right now that's just going to destroy your whole life. I thought if I made the wrong decision coming out of undergrad, my life was just going to be a total train wreck. I really believed that. And I anguished. I was just absolutely in agony over, where am I going to go to graduate school? It doesn't matter. If you're a hard worker, if you're driven, if you care, you're going to have a good career wherever you go, or you're going to decide this isn't for me and you're going to back up and you're going to start something else. You are not going to make a life-ending decision like at that moment, right? You're not going to destroy your whole life if you decide to go here versus there as an undergrad. And I wish someone had told me that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great perspective. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. The Institute for Leadership and Service offers the Calling and Purpose in Society, or CAPS, Fellows Program. The CAPS Fellows program helps students develop their sense of calling and purpose in society by reimagining the traditional internship as a communal and reflective experience, deepening its impact on discernment. CAPS provides students with the opportunity to address some of society's most challenging and complex issues through work at nonprofit organizations on the front lines of environmental conservation, refugee resettlement, education and literacy, the role of the arts and humanities, basic social services, disaster relief, and human flourishing. Come to the CAPS info session on November 6th at 6:30 p.m. in the Brown and Gold room of the Hair Union. There will be snacks. Hello, and welcome back to Listening for Purpose. I've been here with Professor Hoult from the Spanish Department, World Languages Department, Spanish, whatever.
Section.
All right, so we have been talking about Professor Hoult's high school Spanish teacher, who really impacted her sense of purpose, her sense of calling, and played a small part in figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. But as you mentioned earlier, that's kind of an ongoing process and was a process for a long time. So I'm curious, do you see your search for purpose and calling as a done deal, something that's settled, or are you continuing to explore?
Definitely continuing to explore. Yeah. I think, another tendency that I have, and maybe that a lot of us have, is to compartmentalize. I feel like I'm constantly struggling against that. I've been working on, the last few years, deepening my service to my church. I'm church council secretary, following in my mom's footsteps, and I do some other stuff there. But it's easy to have kind of the church life, right? Church morning prayer life, and then go teach Spanish and not really think again about how it all comes together, right? How does who I am in church and morning prayer inform who I am in the Spanish classroom, and vice versa. I think, it's good to kind of remind ourselves of the importance of an integrated self and not being so, I can't find a better word than compartmentalized about it. So I feel like that's always a struggle. How do I live out a Christian sense of purpose in the classroom with student organizations, chairing my department, my research, etc. Right? That's something to be mindful about, I think, because it's easy to have it all be kind of separate. And the other thing is just different life stages, like we've been talking about. I won't be chair anymore after this year. I'm happy to let somebody else take over, and then I can, move into some different roles around here, focus more on my writing, for example. But then what's next, right? Retirement. I don't see myself just kind of relaxing and only doing crosswords. So I want to think again about what's my role in the church when I finish this career? What kind of retirement job do I want to have? How can I use my experience to help people, but in different ways, or to teach, but in different ways? Because we're all teachers, right? So there's a lot that's actually still up in the air for me, even at this stage. Definitely.
Yeah, again, I think that's a really valuable perspective to offer, that, calling is never really a done deal. I think there's this perspective that you go to college, and while you're there, you figure out your career, and then your career is your calling, and then you do your career for, 30, 40 years, and then you finish that up, and then, oops, done with your calling. That's it, but that's just very incorrect.
Yeah, I think we harm ourselves when we think of calling as, I think this was a Pastor Kate quote maybe, but she said at some point, calling is not a straight line.
Yes.
Right? I think it's so important to recognize that at any stage you have multiple possibilities. Again, you're not going to have a catastrophic consequence if you do this versus that for a while. You can explore, even at my age, you can explore, right? And definitely at your age, you can explore different things. If you don't like something, back out of it. You're not locked in. You're not locked in forever to something that just isn't the right fit for you. You can, I don't like the language of fit, but I don't know how better to say it. It's not life-giving for you. It's not the best way for you to use your gifts, right? There might be a better way, but you learn something every time you try something new.
Yeah.
I learned things from all of the jobs I had. And let me tell you, I was a prep cook in a nursing home. I was a receptionist. I did development work at a hospital. I tutored kids. I taught public school. I did a lot of things that I wasn't great at, but I learned something every time. Just take what you can, and leave the rest.
That's really useful. Do you have one certain experience that you feel like you learned the most from in your life?
Oh, wow. I feel like that's a really good question. What came to mind when you just said that was some of the places that I taught when I was in graduate school. I taught at a lot of different kinds of institutions, so big state schools, smaller private schools. I taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Which I love art. I got to go to the museum free. It was great. My students were all artists. That was really fun, but very different audience from Valpo's students. And this is, 26, 27 years ago now. But I've told this story around here before. I was teaching a poetry class there in translation, so Latin American poetry in English. Had about 15 students, and Latin American poetry has a lot of scriptural references. It just does. It's that's the tradition. And so there was a poem we were reading, and it had an absolute blatant, really obvious reference to Adam and Eve in the garden. And so I'm thinking, this is not even a thing that I'm going to have to explain. So, I throw it out to my students, a softball. So what's being referenced here? None of them had any idea.
Oh, wow.
Did not know who Adam and Eve was. Not one of the 15. Didn't even recognize it. Didn't ring a bell. And I'm not judging, but what I like about a place like Valpo is that I can, not that I assume biblical literacy in all my students or that they're all Christian or whatever, but as a cultural reference, right? People generally know who Adam and Eve are, or if they don't, I can explain it. I can take a minute to explain it in class and not get the eye rolls. And, my art students were very negative, I guess, when I explained, look, this is the first book of the Bible. This is the creation story. These are these two humans that were created, whatever. And I told them at the time, like, I'm surprised none of you appear to have heard of this. When I was a kid, I said my mom not only read the Bible to me, but quizzed me on it. And they were so, I remember a student just saying, oh, well, I wasn't forced to read the Bible, right, in a very disdainful way. And there's all this eye rolling. And I feel like at least at Valpo, people sign on to, we're at a Christian university, we're at a university that's under the cross. We're at least not going to ridicule each other for knowing who Adam and Eve are. Right. And that was just a weird moment for me where I started thinking about what kind of institution do I want to be at? I want to have the freedom to explore things like that. I want to be able to talk about, look, in this poem, these things are being referenced and nobody's acting like it's weird or looking down on me for knowing it, which is what I felt kind of for those students and other institutions as well. I'm picking on them, but the University of Chicago is a very secular place. I was there for 7 years, right?
So you almost learned from like you had an experience that was a little more negative and it showed you what you did and what you didn't want. That's really interesting.
Yeah, like I found out that I didn't really want to do high school or middle school because I tried both of those. The kids were great. I just wasn't equipped. I didn't know how to teach them. And just, like these very secular institutions, again, I love art and my students there were great, but creative, wonderful people. But I really liked coming to a place like Valpo where we talk openly about vocation, where we have morning prayer. We have those opportunities if you want to be involved in them. Right. You're not coerced, right? And there's diversity, and I love that. And I love learning from people from other faith traditions, and I respect people with no faith tradition, but I like being able to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I feel like a lot of people who have had most of their experience at Valpo aren't as aware of that distinction as you might be as someone who's had experience at institutions that don't have that same energy to them. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's true. Right. So what other people or communities have been constructive as you've discerned purpose in your life? So we've talked about your high school Spanish teacher, but who else?
Yeah.
Who else?
Oh, definitely my professors in college and graduate school. There were people who, really took an interest in me because I was so into it, right? Like not every undergraduate has this love of literature. And I feel like it's less and less now, right? People who are really interested in literature, but they saw that I really wanted to keep going with it, and they really encouraged me. They wrote letters of recommendation. They helped me get scholarships. They helped me figure out where to go next because I didn't know how to discern that for myself. I was a first generation college student. My parents are wonderfully supportive. They insisted that all their kids go to college. But they weren't really able to advise me. And I didn't know what I was doing and made a lot of mistakes. And there were mentors who said, look, here are some good programs that you should apply to for the next step. And that's where I'd go. I'd figure it out, and then I'd, get there, and the next person would say, here's where you should go. The University of Chicago has this person who's really famous in Latin American poetry, so you should go there. And for a while, I was really reliant on their advice just to figure out what my next step was going to be. So definitely my professors. Yeah, and I should mention, as well, my family, parents, grandparents. Even though they didn't have the same kind of academic trajectory that I did, they were super supportive. And that's important too, just having that supportive family system.
Yes, absolutely. All right. I have one final question for you as we're wrapping up. What is one way that you think you would... Okay, I phrased that poorly. What is one idea or way that you would use to encourage people in the Valpo community to challenge how they think about purpose and calling?
I keep coming back to this idea that we sometimes feel like we have to figure it out at an early juncture, And certainly there are world cultures where that's kind of how the system is set up, right? I think where we are, we absolutely don't have to have it all figured out. I think exploration is healthy. Discernment is important. And just giving yourself some grace if you don't know exactly what you're going to do, and avoid catastrophic thinking. It's not all going to come crashing down if you don't make the best decision right in this moment. Or if you make, a different decision maybe from what your parents or somebody else is advising you to do, right? Try it. If it doesn't work out, try something else. But don't spend your undergraduate career being anxious about making the wrong decision. That's what I wish someone had told me, because I was way too anxious and nervous and guilt-ridden, especially my senior year, because I was so afraid of making a wrong decision. I should have given myself a little grace, cut myself a little slack there. But I think, first gen students and oldest kids often feel this pressure, right? You're the trailblazer. You got to get it right. Should have given myself a little more space. And I hope you all do too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been amazing to hear about your experience and what's inspired you in your life. You gave a lot of really amazing advice. I'm thinking about, when we put out the episodes, we have like a sound bite from the middle at the beginning. It's like a little hook. And I'm like, okay. Oh, I could use anything that you said as the hook. Wow. And it would get people to listen. I'm so glad that I had you on. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.